Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar about the fundamentals of fall protection. We'll be starting the webinar in just a few seconds, but today's presentation will last about 45 minutes, and we'll have some time carved out at the end to take questions. So you can ask questions using the chat function in GoToWebinar, and we'll do our best to address everything that has been asked. If we do run out of time, someone from our team will reach out to you following the webinar. So my name is Matt Burtney. I'm the content marketer for Levitt-Safety, and I'll be your moderator for today. This presentation is being recorded, and we'll send a copy via email to everyone who's registered, so you don't have to worry about taking notes. And joining me today is Jennifer Abraham. She's the training manager for Honeywell Canada. She's worked with Honeywell for over a decade and previously worked as an HSE coordinator and site training manager in the oil and gas industry. So Jennifer, thank you so much for making the time today. I'm very excited for this conversation. I will pass the microphone over to you, and I will be back closer to question period for more.
Great, thanks so much, Matt. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I wanted to welcome everybody for joining us today live and also in our recorded sessions to follow as well. So really exciting opportunity. We were really anxious to and really happy to be able to have this opportunity to join forces with Levitt to be able to share some of this education and opportunity. So we do have some other opportunities. This is a complete webinar series, so that's very exciting. This started to be one webinar and it's turned into a series about 11, if not more. We're just kind of getting into some of the further details of that, but for successfully completing all of the webinars, you actually can receive some credit towards our qualified person program, and I believe Levitt is also providing a discount. I'm not sure exactly what that discount is. Matt can fill us in towards Honeywell products as well for attending and completing all of the webinar series. So some really exciting opportunities and some offerings for everybody. So we'll get started. I don't have a lot of time and there's lots to talk about, so we'll just get going. So we're going to do an introduction to fall protection. So, we kind of have to start somewhere. So in this webinar, we're going to talk about the need for fall prevention and fall protection, why fall stats and incident tracking are essential in understanding where improvements to worker safety should be made, OH&S regulations and standards that drive the need for fall protection, responsibilities of the employer, supervisor, and employee, competency and due diligence. Those are big, big subjects. So why fall protection? So let's talk about that to start with. Why do we even want it? Why do we even need it? So, we need to think about fall hazards and the effects on an individual. Falls are never expected, but remember, most falls are predictable and preventable. So lack of fall hazard awareness, hazard identification and planning can lead to injuries, death, loss of time and money to the workers, families, and employers. So workers that practice unsafe behaviors are a potential hazard not only to themselves, but to every worker around them. And obviously the end result can be devastating, if not fatal. So typically what's going to happen out there is those people are going to, somebody with a poor safety background or behavior, they're definitely going to have an effect on the other people that are around them. Sometimes they might not be the ones to actually get injured, but maybe they're going to create an injury for somebody else. So adequate fall protection solutions would be policies and procedures, equipment and training, legislative requirements, and standards. We're going to talk about all of these things. So failure to provide and follow any of the following could be a direct cause of a fall from heights. So why fall protection? So there's limitless potential for encountering falls. You could encounter fall hazards anywhere at any height. Slips and trips, falls most commonly induce muscle sprains, tears, bone fractures, and other associated injuries. A sprain or a strain is actually going to take us longer to heal than something like a bone fracture or a break is going to take. And the older we are, the longer it takes to recover as well. Death can occur in falls in less than 4 feet, typically due to head injuries associated with a fall. So we're going to put a question out there to everyone, and maybe you could just put your answers into the chat. What do you think, why do you think there would be head injuries associated with a fall of only 4 feet? What would be the cause of that? We'll just give everybody a couple of minutes. We like when people participate.
I was going to say, we have a quiet audience today. We got a few
Very
answers
quiet
coming in, though.
audience. No answers. Nobody wants to throw anything out there.
So
I don't
we got
like
a
it
few
when I
people who are thinking,
can't see people. I like it when they volunteer before they're voluntold. So there's nobody to voluntold.
yeah. So we have loss of balance, we have no fall protection, no PPE, head striking a wall or other object.
Yeah, those could definitely all be those could all be causes for sure. One thing that we actually do, and I'm going to look at the picture that's on the screen. So one thing that actually happens to us is inversion. We actually invert much more quickly than we actually think that we do. So men actually start to invert. So we start to do a header in typically about 4 feet, and women in about 5 feet. So women, our center of gravity is a little bit lower down in the hips, where man's center is a little bit higher up towards the shoulders. So something called inversion. So you could have a fall in as little as 4 feet and be right on your noodle. So a lot of head injuries associated with falls. And obviously striking things on the way down, those are all really great answers. So why fall protection? A fall from a height can often result in serious injury or death. So common types of injuries that could lead to death would be suffocation due to a closed airway, lack of blood flow and oxygen to the brain, a heart attack, and injuries due to impact. Somebody just mentioned that. So we're going to talk in one of our last modules, in our rescue module, about suffocation due to a closed airway. We're going to talk about blood flow and oxygen to the brain and the heart, and we're going to talk about all of that stuff in our rescue module. So why fall protection? Potentially, we put ourselves in jeopardy every day while working at a height. Historical averages show that 1 in 6 people will sustain a life-altering fall at some point during their life. A simple fall in a bathtub or while climbing a tree can result in a permanent injury or even death. So if you were in my class right now, I'd be asking you if, what is your fall? So maybe Matt wasn't ready for this, but I'm going to ask Matt if he's ever had any type of fall that he could share with everyone.
Oh, I was not ready for this. I remember as a teenager missing the last step on a ladder, coming off of a ladder, and there was physical pain and just total terror of that extra drop.
Yes, yes. So I found that pain is a great teacher. The more something hurts, the less likely we are to do it again. So, I certainly learned my lesson. In 2019, I was moving fall protection equipment, big, large, heavy bag of fall protection equipment into the back of my SUV. I was doing everything that a safety person shouldn't do. I was rushing. I was on uneven ground. There was some ice there, poor ergonomics, you name it. I pretty much did it as a safety person. I was the example of what not to do that day. So putting some extra strain and pressure, and my knee decided it couldn't handle what I was asking of it. So, my knee went completely sideways in a direction it's not supposed to, and I became a puddle on the ground, and I cried very ugly for a little bit. And then I got up and I tried to walk and stepped on something else uneven on the ground as I tried to make my way back to the house, and was on the ground in a messy puddle again. So surgery last January, as the barometer changes and we go up and down in our temperatures, it's not so much my knee anymore, it's all the muscle memory. So, and the older we get, you get up in the morning, you're like, oh, geez, you can feel this stuff for years and years to come, unfortunately. So, like I said, pain's a great teacher. The more it hurts, the less likely you are to do it again. Let's just say I've had proper ergonomics since October 16th of 2019. So that's my story. And if somebody's had a story, I encourage you to write it in the chat and say, you've fallen from a ladder and you broke your arm, or Maybe you were working on a job and your employer didn't provide fall protection for you and there was an incident. So it could have been as, younger as a child, or something foolish as a teenager, or maybe something in your adult life. So we love to hear the stories from people and stuff. So please do share them. Fall stats. So we're going to talk about lost time claims in Canada. We've got some stats from 2017. I've got some from 2018. I bet you if I had 2019-20 and I actually showed you what the beginning of 2021 looked like, I bet you the trend is the same. So we've got number 1 is bodily reaction and exertion. Number 2, we've got contact with objects and equipment. And number 3, we've got falls. So, we're looking at close to 50,000 lost time claims in Canada. So if there's any safety folks out there, I'm sure you've tried to do research and try and look up, how many fatalities were in Canada in confined spaces, or you've tried to find stuff for fall protection in particular. And it's really not that easy to find stats. Number 1, who is collecting all of the data? So who are you going to find that information from? Who was responsible to report all of that information to them? And confined space is a great example because they don't say that the person died because of a confined space. They died because of asphyxiation, or, they died for some other reason. What was the cause, or what did they succumb to? So, we do have falls as an actual action, but was it a fall from a height? Was it a fall on the same level? So we have different types of falls. The types of falls and things like that, we're going to talk about that in our next webinar that's coming up in webinar 2. So the trends just kind of continue to repeat themselves. So like I said, whether we're in 17, 18, 19, 20, I can guarantee those numbers are the same. They've just gone up or down. So there's some case studies and stuff. So this webinar is going to be recorded, and I think they're going to publish it so people can have access to it. So there's a few different case studies and stuff here. Being in safety myself, I spent 10 years out in oil and gas as an HSE coordinator to start with, and now I've been with Honeywell for over 13 years. And it was interesting to hear or be a part of some of the things that happened on sites that were very tragic and unfortunate, but to also see their family members or their coworkers then come into my training class years and years later. So, we have incident history. I'll read this one. There's actually, we're going to start to talk about due diligence in this webinar. We're going to talk about fines and how employers, like I said, pain's a great teacher. Well, what hurts the employer is the pocketbook. So we started to impose fines. The government started to impose fines for people that were not the greatest performers when it came to safety performance. So here's an incident from 2019 in Alberta construction. Workers were in the process of repairing a metal flashing on the 4th floor balcony underneath the railing. A worker fell into the railing, which was not secured, fell from the balcony, suffering fatal injuries. This one is also from Alberta, 2018. The incident, the industry was not reported. A worker was walking on top of a load of pipe that was stacked on a trailer and attached to a sling. The worker lost their footing and fell 2.4 meters, sustaining fatal injuries. So I bet if you looked at a lot of these injuries, I can guarantee a lot of those things are probably head injuries. There was an incident. It's unfortunate. I'm sorry, some of the screen has got cut off, but this incident in Saskatchewan actually talks about the company actually pleaded guilty and they were fined $140,000. So now we're starting to get into organizations starting to be fined and held accountable and said, hey, you have not done your due diligence. So I've heard of many different, I'll talk about a really sad incident that happened up at Suncor. I'm not going to go through and read all of these case studies. They're going to be available to everybody and you guys can read them yourselves and such. So there was an incident up at Suncor with a young fella that he was working alone. He had been working around I'm not exactly positive that whether it was an open topped type of vessel that held water, or around some type of some location that had water, or a sludge pond or something around it. So nonetheless, liquids that he was working around, and there was an opportunity for him to be able to fall into that area. And at the end of the day, it was time to sign out for everybody, and he wasn't there at the end of the day. So they had assumed that this worker had just left early and forgot to sign out and didn't tell anyone. So the next morning, the shift starts, everybody goes and gets their gear, they go get their equipment, they make their way to their work locations. By 8 o'clock in the morning, they have now found their worker and their partner, and he is drowned. He obviously, nobody knows what happened, in this tank that he was in, that he swam around the corner. There was, I heard a ladder that he could have climbed out of. Don't know if he struck his head on the way down. Don't know how he ended up there to start with. He wasn't supposed to be in there, so there was no policies and procedures in place for him to have some type of life preserver, or there was no planning put in place, and there was no hazard assessment that identified that there was a potential and that was an opportunity he needed to be protected from. So it was very unfortunate. I ended up having the sister in one of my classes one year. So, it gives you more than goosebumps. So, due diligence, extremely important. So we're just going to move on to a couple other ones. These guys in British Columbia, Work Safe BC, fellas, these guys are repeat offenders. I feel that this fine didn't hurt enough, in my opinion. So the worker, a representative of the firm, was not using a personal fall protection system, and no other form of fall protection was in place. This exposed the worker to a risk of a fall of about 14 feet. We're going to talk about at what height fall protection is required in different provinces. And I can assure you that 14 feet is far too high in British Columbia. The firm failed to ensure fall protection was used, repeated high-risk violation. The firm also failed to provide its workers with information, instruction, training, and supervision necessary to ensure their health and safety. The company was fined $5,000. Like I said, in my opinion, that's just simply not quite enough. So here's another one is this company, they've actually cited parts of the OH&S Act for failing to provide necessary supervision to ensure the employee health and safety. The employer was fined $4,000 per count, plus $800 per victim surcharge of $1,600. So this was in New Brunswick. So they failed to provide fall protection. Sorry, I should have read that part first. So as you can see, whether you're in New Brunswick, British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, wherever you are, due diligence applies to you. And we're going to talk about the bill and how it became law and stuff like that. So on average in Canada, 20% of all work-related incidents are directly related to falls. So incident tracking, we absolutely need to track our incidents. Our safety people, it gives us some purpose. It helps a variety of groups focus their efforts on areas most in need of improvements. Absolutely. So as we investigate these things, we look at official inquiries. Maybe we have discovered that we need to provide our workers with more training. Maybe that was part of the problem. Maybe there's a certain task or location that's far more likely to cause slips, trips, and falls than another location. So reviewing incident trends or repeat incidents, we can help identify problem or high-risk areas. Excuse me. Governing bodies and regulations. So provincial and federal regulators. So every single province out there, they've got a governing body that says at this height you need to wear fall protection. So it's a different governing body in every single province. And then if you work for the government, if you work for CN Rail, you work for the police, the military, you work for somebody who's governed through the government, you need to follow federal legislation. So regulators are responsible for enforcement of the legislation. Violation of rules can range from written orders requiring a wide range of corrective actions up to a financial penalty and or imprisonment. So CSA, so governing bodies and regulations. So when I talk about me, I talk about me as a manufacturer. So OH&S, occupational health and safety, they don't tell me as a manufacturer how to make my equipment. They tell you as the worker, as the employer, what your responsibilities are. But I've got CSA, ANSI, and CE that are on my case telling me, this is how I want you to build it. This is what it needs to be rated for, tested for, blah, blah, blah. So if something is going to be sold in Canada, excuse me, it needs to be CSA approved. There are some pieces of equipment. So that's the Canadian Standards Association. There are some pieces of equipment that CSA just simply doesn't have a standard for them. So we will actually accept the ANSI standard, which is the American National Standards Institute. There are some differences in how they do their testing. CSA will say, this is what your equipment, how it needs to be built, tested, rated for, so on and so forth. Then we actually have to send them samples and they'll do testing on our equipment. And then they give us the big golden star and a check mark. ANSI says you have to do all this stuff and just let me know when you're done. So they kind of put it back onto the manufacturers to do their own testing and make sure that we're complying with ANSI. And then we've got CE or European Committee for Standardization. So often you'll see a lot of hard goods like carabiners and hooks and things like that are going to have a CE designation on them. So mandatory fall protection standards, regulatory requirements can differ from, so like I said, so depending on the different province you're in, there could be some differences. So, and if you're working in multiple different provinces, you know, it's the employer's responsibility to ensure that he provides that information to the worker, and it's the worker's responsibility to make sure he knows that stuff before he goes ahead and goes to work. So the height at which you need to use fall protection could be different. I think I already mentioned that on the last slide there. So most common requirement in most provinces, I think it's pretty much all of them, is 10 feet or lower if there's an unusual possibility of injury. So if there's a vat of acid, rebar sticking up, the meat grinder, and you don't want to be ground chucked by the end of the day, then I guess you probably need to use fall protection at a different height. So a couple of questions for you folks. We'd like to certainly know, do you know who is your governing body that enforces the rules for fall protection in your province? So you could put some answers in the chat there for us. And at the same time, when you answer that question, please go ahead and answer, does your workplace follow federal or provincial legislation? You can answer both of those things. And we'll just give everybody a couple minutes to do that.
We're getting a lot of answers this time around, which is great.
Good to hear. Good to hear. I like it.
And we have people from across the country, which is awesome to see. So we got Service Newfoundland and Newfoundland, Alberta OH&S. We have Ontario Ministry of Labor.
Ministry of Labor. Oof. That's a loaded bag, the Ministry of Labor.
I think I saw WorkSafe BC in here as well. So we got
WorkSafe BC. WorkSafe BC does the greatest job of videos and supporting materials and things like that. Alberta, I think sometimes in some ways has some of the most stringent legislation, but I feel that they don't have as much supporting materials like videos and things like that. Speaking of videos and stuff, Matt or somebody over at my friends at Levitt, any videos that I would normally have in the presentation, there already would have been a couple of little videos. As we put these webinar sessions out, Matt's going to share some links and stuff so you guys can go to some YouTube videos and things like that. that we typically stuff that we share in the program, but we just can't do it through the webinar series. So Matt's going to end up sharing those links with everyone.
Yes, and somebody asked if we will be sharing the PowerPoint and the presentation of the day, and the answer is yes, probably within the next 2 days after we finish our session today. We will work in the back end to get that sent out to everybody.
Perfect. Awesome. And we'll also be sharing links. So like I said before, so if you're successful getting through all of the webinars, you can actually use it as a prerequisite into our qualified inspector program. So my friends at Levitt are also going to send out the links to our qualified inspector. So our qualified person program, I'm not even sure how much it is. I don't know if it's like, I'm not sure. I'll have to get the price on it for sure. But it'll save you hundreds and hundreds of dollars to commit to this webinar process, and then you'll just do an equivalency test for us, and then you'll be able to get into qualified inspectors. So that's fantastic. So because we are going to share the presentation with you, we've just got, if you don't know who your governing body is or what they're called, not everybody is, in Alberta, it's pretty simple. Alberta Occupational Health and Safety. Wouldn't that be nice if everybody was had the same thing? You just put the right province in front. But British Columbia's got WorkSafe BC, federal is the Employment and Social Development Canada, Manitoba is Safe Manitoba, New Brunswick, WorkSafe New Brunswick. So there's, I'm not going to go through all of them. They're going to be in your presentation there. So we've covered quite a few there. So besides the occupational health and safety, we've got your corporations and organizations and the Shells and of the world and the Huskies, and they may come along and actually say, you know what, just because it's 10 feet in Alberta or it's 10 feet in British Columbia, we're actually going to make it 6 feet. So, and we need to comply with that. So as long as they're superseding and they're beating what the legislation is saying, they can't turn around and say, we're going to make it 14 feet and legislation says 10. But we certainly can say it's 6 feet and legislation says that it's 10. So you certainly need to be aware of not only your provincial, your federal legislation, but also be aware of your client requirements as well. So responsibilities of the employer. So the employer must develop a written fall protection policy and procedures relevant for their workplace. Identify all areas where there is a potential of injury due to a fall. Consider the use of passive fall arrest systems. So passive fall arrest systems, they're passive. We don't really have to do anything to engage them. They're just there. So guardrails, they're just there. I didn't have to put a harness on in order for it to work. It's just there. Some travel restraint and also some fall restricting systems can be considered passive fall arrest systems. So an employer must also develop fall arrest rescue procedures. So must be very detailed, and it must, it must be a prompt rescue. We're going to talk about how short and minimal our timelines are when it comes to rescue. We must also train our workers and supervisors to fully understand and properly fulfill their roles and responsibilities when it comes to fall protection and prevention. Workers should have easy access to policies and procedures. They shouldn't have to go look for them. They should just have access to them. So, these things can be reviewed, obviously, pre-job, but also sometimes when our policies or procedures change, we can implement them as a safety meeting topic. Everybody signs off that we've reviewed it with them. But we're certainly reviewing our policies and procedures with our people before they're doing their work. Look at that. What does the next thing say? It says before being allowed into the area. So any training, instructions, equipment, hazard assessments, job planning, all that stuff needs to take place, and we need to be prepared before we're walking into that area or into that hazard. An employer must ensure the fall arresting system consists of all the required components. So the employer can't just provide the harness and then they don't give them the lanyard and the cable sling and all the other stuff. They need to provide the entire system. Make sure the equipment and clothing is provided and is used in and maintained in good conditions. So do they have a maintenance program, a documented scheduled inspection program? That's all about what our qualified inspector program is about. And that's part of a good fall protection program. So ensure PPE is used effectively and according to the policies and procedures, legal requirements, and the manufacturer's specifications. Anybody that has read a half a page in any legislation book, I guarantee they probably came at least 4 times across the statement as per manufacturer specifications. So throughout our webinar, you know, people think that manufacturer specifications are this elusive thing. They're not. They come right with the equipment. You open up that bag with the equipment in it, there's a booklet in there. It comes right with it. The other thing is that a lot of the stuff in our webinar, when we come to inspection criteria, is copied and pasted right from the manufacturer specification. So you will want to print it off. You know, that's the thing. Legislation says blah, 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 or as per manufacturer specifications. So they like to wash their hands of stuff. Our standards change faster than our legislation does. So review and amend the plan on a regular basis and after relevant workplace changes, after a fall occurs, even a near miss, to ensure the plan is effective or to see how it may be improved. So the supervisor has got a lot of responsibilities. He's essentially taking on the role of the employer. So all of those things that was the employer's problem, those are all of the supervisor's problems as well. So they're taking on the responsibilities and they're acting on behalf of the employer. So they must provide safe working conditions for the people under their supervision, provide workers with health and safety training, education, and instructions, comply with regulatory and company standards. They must measure and evaluate the workers' health and safety performance. Geez, we're about to talk about competency, and I don't know a better way to measure and evaluate a worker's health and safety performance than doing competency checks. So ensure workers under their direction use all hazard controls properly, communicate with workers under their control of all known or reasonably foreseeable hazards to health and safety in the area the worker is performing work. So the supervisor is to participate in regular inspections for unsafe acts and conditions and implement corrective actions and measures where and when required. So participate in incident investigations, encourage feedback from their workers. Concerning the identification and control of hazards associated with the task, correct worksite conditions which have caused or have the potential to cause an incident or injury, and lead by example and set a good example. I had a worker in my class one day and he had 9 other workers that all came from the same company in the class with him. And I had said something about right to refuse work. We're about to talk about that. So I talked about the right to refuse work and he said, oh, you refuse work, you'd be the first one out the gate. And I said, well, better to be the first one out the gate than the first one with your foot in the coffin. And he said, oh, I don't know about that. And then I looked at all of his other buddies and I said, hey, how do you feel about working with this guy now? And wouldn't you know it, nobody wants to work with the guy with the bad safety attitude, because he's probably not just going to hurt himself, he's going to hurt somebody else in the process. So I had gone to his safety folks. I said, hey, listen, I just thought I would give you a heads up and let you know that, you know, your worker maybe just doesn't care about safety too much and a little disgruntled about just about everything. So when I told them who it was, they said, oh, that's the boss's son. Yeah, that's right. So it was all acceptable because it was the boss's son, and it wasn't too hard to see that the apple hadn't fallen too far from the tree. So the worker, he's not getting out of this without having responsibilities. So the worker's responsibility is to alert the supervisor about any unknown or unexpected fall hazards before beginning or continuing any work, participate in fall protection planning where relevant and when requested, follow the fall protection regulations for your jurisdiction and the workplace policies and procedures, actively participate in fall protection education and training. Don't just show up. I always tell all of my people, you're going to get out of it what you put into it. So wear and use all the required personal protective equipment, clothing, or devices appropriately as determined by the employer. Inspect your PPE and system and components before each use. Protect the PPE. Treat it with respect. Notify the supervisor or the employer of any broken, defective, or missing protective equipment, and be aware of your right to refuse unsafe work. We're going to talk about that right away. So workers' basic rights in Canada. So we have the right to know what hazards are present in the workplace, the right to participate in keeping your workplace healthy and safe, and the right to refuse work that you believe to be dangerous to yourself or to coworkers. So the right to know about health and safety. So you have the right to know about workplace hazards and have access to health and safety information at your workplace. The employer has a responsibility to make you aware of your rights and your duties under OH&S. Your employer must also provide your information about hazards at your workplace, controls used to eliminate or control the hazards, and any relevant workplace policies and procedures. A right to participate. 100%, you have a right and also an obligation to participate in your own health and safety discussions. So you have an obligation and a right that to be part of your hazard assessment planning for your own job. It may be in collaboration with a safety person, with your supervisor, with the rest of your team, but you definitely need to be a part of that process and know, what the hazards are, what were the control measures that were implemented, and possibly be a part of that. The right to refuse work. So you have the right to refuse work if you feel that it is not safe to you or another person. So this has to be hazards that are not normal for a job. You can't go to a confined space, and there are some known inherent dangers with a confined space that are mitigated through other controls, and you can't just go, well, this confined space is dangerous, I can't work in here. If you are not competent, if you are not trained, if you are not comfortable, if you're claustrophobic, whatever makes you unfit to do that job. So like I said, maybe you're not trained. So maybe the job isn't dangerous. Maybe you're just not competent or fit to do that job, and that is unsafe. So any of these situations would require that being reported to the supervisor, and the supervisor changing the person out, fixing the situation, doing whatever it takes to fix the problem. If it's a dangerous situation, we can't just switch the person out. We have to fix the problem. So worker competency, a lot of people think they're going to send their people to training and they're going to become competent. That's not the case. As much information as I can possibly try and cram into people, I simply can't deem competency in training. So worker competency consists of 3 components. The person must be adequately qualified, suitably trained, with sufficient experience to perform the work without supervision or with only a minimal degree of supervision. So as you can see, for an iron worker coming to take fall protection training, that's only one little piece of the whole pie. So I certainly can't deem them competent as an iron worker just because they came to take fall protection training. So the employer should develop a competency program. So basically, let's say for fall protection, there's going to be a variety of different locations and different types of fall protection equipment. And the workers, you're going to say, okay, you're going to have to work here, here, and there, and this is what you're doing. Pick out the best fall protection equipment that's suitable for your task and the location you're going to be in. There should be documentation. There needs to be a checklist. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. So do they know how to inspect their equipment? Do they know how to wear it properly? Do they know how to do a fall calculation? Do they know what their responsibilities are as per occupational health and safety? So this is simply an observation and a checklist that the supervisor can accommodate. So obviously it should be done with facilitated by a competent person. I only highlighted that point because I knew by the time I got to the slide, I was going to tell you all this stuff before I even got here. So I didn't bother highlighting a bunch. I already talked about this. Do they know how to do their hazard elimination and control? What is the applicable fall protection legislation? Calculating free fall distance, dismantling, storage, common hazards associated with the equipment. Hazard assessment, responsibilities of the designated individuals. What are the fall protection system assessments for determining when a system is safe to use? The selection and use of non-certified anchorages. Is the worker competent to be able to select a non-certified anchorage? We're going to talk about non-certified anchorages in yet another webinar that we're going to have. That would be the A's of the ABCs of fall protection. Competent person education and training and evaluation should be updated, and refresher sessions should be conducted as per regulatory and industry requirements to stay current with the fall protection system and rescue industry requirements. Also recommended when new fall protection systems are used or installed or new fall hazards are encountered. So due diligence, the nitty-gritty. So due diligence is a level of judgment, care, prudence, determination, and activity that a person would reasonably be expected to do under particular circumstances. Applied to occupational health and safety, due diligence means that employers shall take all reasonable precautions under the particular circumstances to prevent injuries or accidents in the workplace. This duty also applies to situations that are not addressed elsewhere in occupational health and safety legislation. Reasonable precautions are also referred to as reasonable care. Refers to the care, caution, or action a reasonable person is expected to take under similar circumstances. So if you have got 20 organizations in an industry that are doing the same job, maybe that, let's say hydrovacing, you got 20 hydrovacing companies, 19 of them are doing the same thing to protect their workers, and the 20th guy is like, nah, I'm not doing it. The 20th guy, he has a serious incident, injury, or death. He will be fined. Even if it is not a written in occupational health and safety, it's not a piece of legislation, you will be judged against your peers. If everyone else is able to accommodate something and protect their workers and one company isn't towing the load, they will be fined. This is where due diligence came about. So it was Bill C-45, and then it became law March 31st, 2004. It's federally legislated, and it amends the Canadian Criminal Code. Section 217.1 in the Canadian Criminal Code says everyone who undertakes or has the authority to direct how another person does work or performs a task is under legal duty to take reasonable steps to prevent bodily harm to that person or any other persons arising from that work or task. The Act changed two parts of the Criminal Code, and it provides a means to hold corporations and organizations criminally liable for negligence as a result of their actions or inactions of their senior managers. It created a new duty and standard of care for those who direct the work of others by the introduction of Section 217.1. The amendment also added Section 22.1 and 22.2 to the Criminal Code, imposing criminal liability on organizations and its representatives and other offenses. That's where those fines started to come in. So in order to effectively demonstrate due diligence, you must take all reasonable precautions in the circumstances to carry out your work and your health and safety responsibilities. This is a standard of care to comply. So effective supervision and a common goal of safety planning are key components of due diligence. So just remember, due diligence is about what you do before an incident happens, not after. It has nothing to do with what you're doing after the fact. Due diligence includes several criteria. So employer must have written OH&S policies, practices, and procedures, would demonstrate in documents. Remember I said if it's not documented, it didn't happen. How do you prove your due diligence? You have to physically show them that you did something. So I trained them. I did orientation. They were trained for their trade. They took fall protection training. They took confined space training. I did competency checks. These are all things that would need to be documented in order to be able to prove it. Unless they're there at the time that they could visually see it for themselves. One of the largest areas of responsibility an employer has is when it comes to worker safety training. So the training must address the health and safety risks and associated with the specific tasks assigned to the worker. So for an employer to be able to demonstrate due diligence, it's essential that they provide written documentation. So I'm not going to go over this slide because it's everything that I just finished saying. Like I said, orientation, education, training, corrective actions, incident investigations, hazard assessments, all of that stuff should be recorded. Equipment logbooks and maintenance records, safety committee meeting minutes. Like I said, these are all pieces of documentation. Emergency response drills, forms and checklists, sampling and monitoring, stats and frequency, enforcement of health and safety rules. So have you written anybody up for non-compliance? All elements of due diligence program must be in effect before an accident or injury occurs. So there it is again. Remember, due diligence is demonstrated by your actions before an event occurs, not after. Sorry, I talked too much before, so now I'm trying to catch up on my time now. So Matt's going to take this question over, and it's going to be a poll question. So go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, so everyone, you see the question ahead in front of you. What was the first North American project to use fall protection? We got about 30 seconds for you to answer, and then Jennifer will reveal the real answer afterwards. So we're going to leave the poll up for about another 15 seconds. So we have the Hoover Dam, the CN Tower, the Golden Gate Bridge, or the Empire State Building. Okay, 5 seconds left for anybody who still wants to take the poll. All right. Okay, so we were Hoover Dam was what people thought, with Golden Gate Bridge in second, then Empire State Building, and then the CN Tower in last. So Jennifer, what is the right answer?
Well, my friends that answered the Golden Gate Bridge, you guys are the you guys get the gold star and the 2 thumbs up today. So yeah, the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm not sure what my obsession and my natural draw to the Golden Gate Bridge is. I've watched so many videos and read so much stuff on the Golden Gate Bridge. Very interesting. It was a so-called safe site that only killed 11 men. This was an industry and time where 1 man killed for every $1 million spent had been the norm. So it was a $35 million job. So there's a video, one of my most favorite safety videos ever. Matt's going to share the link with you guys. So it's right from some workers that worked on the Golden Gate Bridge. And, you know, the guy says we should have killed 35 guys. We should have, but we only killed 11 men. We did such a great job. So they were really proud of themselves. They imposed a lot of safety measures that had never been around before. So, you know, Joseph Strauss was the engineer, and he got hard hats worn above ground. That was exciting for them. Then they also had safety belts, and he also spent, I think it was $130,000 on a safety net. So that was the first time a safety net had ever been used, and it really kind of, it sped up the project because the guys weren't worried about falling anymore. So I just watched yesterday a video of a guy that had actually fallen into the net. And he said, you know, he said, when I was falling, he said, I wasn't scared because I knew the net would save me. And he said, but when I was falling, I thought, oh, I'm going to fall into the net. And he thought he was going to spring back up like on a trampoline, and he was going to look all cool when he popped back up again. In fact, he actually broke 4 vertebrae when he landed on his back instead when he fell into the safety net. So the 11 men that were killed, 10 of them were killed on a section of scaffolding that have fallen into the net. So they were really proud of themselves because other than that incident, they only killed 1 guy. Other than the scaffold incident, they only killed 1 person. So they thought they did a fantastic job. So I could just imagine going to orientation and being like, hey, I hope you get a few paychecks in, because, you know, 35 of you are going to be dead by the end of the job. So it certainly was a safe site for back then. And they really kind of stepped things up in the safety world. And a lot of safety nets were used on bridges and things like that moving forward. So I do encourage you to watch the videos and the links and stuff like that Matt's going to share with you. So there you go. We're at our webinar summary. So just a quick summary. In this webinar, we talked about why is there a need for fall prevention and protection, OH&S legal requirements for the use of fall protection. We talked about different provinces having different regulations. And as we get through the webinars, we're going to get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of some of those details. We talked about CSA, ANSI, and CE and what they do and what that means to us. Responsibilities of the worker, supervisor, employer, worker rights, worker competency can only be assigned by the employer. And we talked a lot about due diligence. The reminder note, it's kind of cut off there. I apologize for that. So just remember, legislation does not change as quickly as our standards do. So that's another reason why OH&S goes blah, blah, blah. or ask for manufacturer specifications, because they will actually have legislation that almost goes against what the equipment can and can't do. So they go, oh, look at this, but by the way, you still need to know what your equipment is capable of doing. So, you know, the standards actually supersede some of that legislation, because the legislation is not accurately reflecting what the equipment is capable of, just because the standards have changed. So there's going to be some webinar questions. I'm going to turn this over to Matt now, and I just wanted to say thanks everyone for joining, and thanks for the opportunity. I'm going to pass it over to Matt, and he's going to let you guys know what you got to do.
Yeah, so for anyone, Jennifer has teased the 11 webinar series that we're putting together. So Jennifer and I are working behind the scenes for the other 10 pieces, but anyone who's interested in taking all 11, there'll also be a competency section. And so here are 4 of the questions that will be asked on the quiz, and that'll be going out to you with the recorded version of the webinar. So what we'll do right now is take a few questions from the audience. We've had a lot of really good ones coming in. We have about 9 minutes left, and so anyone who we don't answer live, we'll reach out to you individually. So the first question we have here is, does the risk of being injured increase when a lanyard is used at 1.8 meters or 1.2 meters?
I'm not sure I completely understand the question. So the farther you fall, the harder you fall. So I'm not sure if that is what we're meaning by the question.
Okay, well, maybe the Jonathan who asked that, if you want to elaborate a little bit in the comments, we'll try to get to your question a little bit later. Someone was asking if you have a competency checklist template available for people.
It's something that we're currently actually working on, because we have actually seen we're actually going to be developing some competency programs to actually, because you'll hear me say this often. So the 3 main reasons why a competency checks and that process isn't happening on a job site: 1, people don't know what it looks like; 2, they don't know how to implement it on the job site; 3, they don't know how to maintain it. It's exactly the same thing with the documented scheduled inspection program for your fall protection equipment. People are typically handing this off to somebody else to do as a third party, because they don't know what it looks like, they don't know how to implement it, and they don't know how to maintain it. So I'm making a note to myself right now that there is a need and a want. So if I finish this, we certainly can put that competency. And if you follow our webinar series, which I hope that you do, I will update people and say, oh, we got that competency thing done, and Matt or whoever in his team is going to send that stuff out. So I'll continue to work on stuff that you guys bring to me and say, hey, this is of interest to me out there. I want to know those things.
Perfect. And people are asking how they can go about getting the rest of the webinar series. As Jennifer and I film episode 2 and onward, we'll be sure to promote that a little bit more. So in the next month or so, you should start to see more of the episodes coming out. We had another great question here. How often should a safety harness be replaced with normal use?
That's a really good question. So previously, many years ago, they used to say that it had a suggested service life limit of 5 years, simply because the material would start to degrade over time, the soft goods. They've now, materials have improved, things have improved. The other thing is, your harness could have been in a bag sitting on a shelf for 3 years before it was used. So, here's part of the problem, and I'm going to talk about a little bit of qualified inspector kind of stuff. So with qualified inspector, basically one of the responsibilities of a qualified inspector is actually because that 5 years that they talked about as a recommendation should really be a service life. That's not the manufacturer's date. It could have sat on a shelf for 4 years and then you took it out of a bag. It's essentially brand new. The service life started right then. So one of the responsibilities of somebody like a qualified inspector would actually be, as soon as you get a piece of equipment in, you would actually open the bag, take it out, do a full documented inspection on it. You are now starting the history or the service life of that piece of equipment. So basically, as long as it continues to pass your inspection and it's in good working order, you can continue to use it.
Perfect. We have a lot of really good questions coming in, and we won't have time to address them all right now. So we may save a few of those for the next episode as well to answer some of them then. So we'll end with this one. What role does skill of the trade have with respect to due diligence?
Well, due diligence, that's, it's really the employer's responsibility to make sure that they're doing their due diligence. So that includes providing workers that are adequately trained, and it goes right along with competency. That's why those things are together in our program. So if a person isn't properly trained or skilled or to do their job, then, and the employer has set them out to go in and take on a task that they're not competent to be able to do, the employer isn't doing their due diligence then. The employer hasn't provided everything that they can, and everything else, like I said before, if there's 19 other employers that are doing exactly the same job, and they've got skilled people that are well trained, and they're fitting all of those three components of competency, and whether it's fall protection or it's actual job training, like I said, fall protection is just a drip in the bucket of the whole trade thing altogether. So, are you competent if you're not trained to do your job as an iron worker or a scaffolder or whatever the case may be? So, and your employer puts you out there and you're not properly trained, well, yeah, my husband is an iron worker, so he's excellent at reading prints and standing these massive towers within a millimeter of where they wanted them stood. And, there's other guys that have been like, oh yeah, I can read prints. There was a guy standing out there one day, and he's standing there looking at some prints, and my husband walked over to him and took the prints and went, there you go. That might help if you had him the right way. So just because you're a journeyman in the trade that you're in doesn't mean that you know how to do everything that there is to do in your trade. So your employer certainly could get themselves into trouble and not be doing their due diligence by putting somebody out there that is not skilled enough to maybe complete the task that they've been asked to do.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you to everyone who attended our webinar today. Thank you, Jennifer, so much for your time and knowledge. This has been fantastic. And we look forward to seeing everybody again in episode 2.
Thanks, everyone.